Hello and welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm John Hendriks and my guest today is Bernie Finn, a member of the Victorian Parliament. Welcome, Bernie.
G'day, John. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's nice to have you today.
Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bernie.
Well, I've been a Member of Parliament for nearly 15 years now in two stints. I was a member of the lower house and now I'm a member of the upper house. Married with 4 children, with a couple of twins as well, included in those 4. And we're all fanatical Richmond supporters, and that has to be a good thing on any score.
Fantastic. That is great. And between the kids, Richmond and Parliament, you've got your hands full.
Not a lot of time left for anything. That's
no.
True. Yeah.
Perhaps for our viewers, you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the pro-life movement over the years?
Well, I was involved in the pro-life movement back when I was at school, which seems to be a long time ago now, but I was very much involved when I was a student and after I left school as well. And over the years, you sort of move on to other things and get involved in other things. And I still, regarded myself as being pro-life. But it was really only when the abortion law reform bill in 2008 came up that I decided that I'd have to do something. Because, it didn't seem that anybody else was, which was a bit disappointing, I have to say. And I was waiting for the cavalry to arrive, and all of a sudden I found myself coming face to face with this dreadful bill. And, there was some support there from a few people, particularly from some of the evangelical Christians, which was great. But the support wasn't there that we might have otherwise expected. And so I decided that, if you want something done, you've got to do it yourself, and I had to do that, and then after the thing was over, devastated and distressed, I decided that I would involve myself more in ensuring that we can turn this thing around, and we will. We will.
So, and I can say thank God that you are involved and have you on our team. So for our viewers, so they can get an understanding of it, from a professional point of view, your pro-life movement started in a very serious sense from around the 2008, or was it before that?
Oh, look, I think it probably was about 12 months before, when I came to the view that some sort of legislation was going to be coming before the Parliament, and that's when I started to try to alert people that this was coming. And I have to say that some of the people that I tried to alert really didn't want to be alerted, and that was obviously very disappointing. But afterwards, it was, I suppose, the night the bill was passed. It was about 11:30 on a Friday night, and I sat in the Parliament of Victoria and just said, "Dear God, what do you want me to do now?" And out of that small prayer, the March for the Baby sprang. And I don't say that I'm the greatest champion of the pro-life movement in the world, and there are a lot of other people that have done some great things over the years. But what we're doing now is hopefully building to a crescendo where we can actually repeal this act that we have in Victoria.
And for our viewers, you mentioned on March for the Babies. I know you're the founder or one of the founders, is that right, of March for the Babies?
Yes,
annual event?
Was started, first one was held on the 10th of October 2009, which was a year to the day that the bill was passed, and we've held 5 since. Some have gone a little bit better than others. The last one was obviously a pretty fiery activity, but I think that shows just how effective we are being, the fact that these people felt it necessary to come out and beat us up in the way that they did. If we weren't having an impact, they would have stayed at home.
Absolutely. And just for our viewers, perhaps you could tell us briefly, what is the current abortion law in Victoria?
Well, the abortion law in Victoria currently is the most extreme in the Western world. It allows abortion right up until the moment of birth. Beyond 24 weeks, 6 months, you just need 2 doctors. Now, I am not aware of any medical facility, any abortion clinic, any hospital that employs less than 2 doctors. So it's just a something that they've thrown in to make it look good, as it were. But effectively, a woman who is 8.5 months pregnant, she can wake up one morning and say, yes, I want an abortion, and she, by law, can have one. And that's something that obviously is horrific. What this law means is that an abortion can be committed for any reason, at any time, any reason and none, I might say, at any time, up to the moment that that child would otherwise be born. It is not something that any of us should be proud of.
That's incredible, isn't it? I think it's it had come as a surprise to many of our viewers today that is actually the current law in this state.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who are not aware of that, and I hear people on radio, some big names on radio occasionally saying, oh no, that's not right, that's not right. Well, let me tell you, as I said to Neil Mitchell just recently, it is right, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't right, but it is right, and that's the reality of Victoria in 2013.
It's very disappointing that Victoria is, I guess, the state in which other states are looking at this law and saying, should we be considering our laws as well? But what we want to do, what all pro-lifers want to do, is we want to try to repeal that act or reverse it. We certainly do, without question. I mean, what we need is a law that actually recognises the humanity of these children. We need a law which effectively looks after the mother, the welfare of the mother, because this law doesn't care about either mother or child, because there is a fallacy, an outrageous lie that is spread by the abortion industry that abortion is good for women. I know so many who have gone through so much pain, so much agony, and are still going through it in many cases, over many years quite often, who've had abortions. They were told lies. And of course the greatest reply that I've heard from women who've had abortions is, I had no choice. Well, where's the abortion industry talks about choice. Where is the choice if these women are saying they had no choice? On that note, we'll take a short break. You're watching Support Life. Please join us straight after the break. Hello and welcome back to Support Life. My guest today is Bernie Finn. Hello, Bernie.
Yeah, John.
Just before the break, Bernie, we were discussing something to do with the current laws of the abortion law in Victoria. Perhaps for our viewers, you could tell us historically what happened at the time the Law Reform Act was passed.
Well, it was a horrific year, actually, 2008, because the Attorney-General of the time, Rob Hulls, was, in his own mind, a social reformer. And he had a raft of legislation put before the Parliament, which was, in many ways, quite horrific. And I, just for history's sake, voted against each of those bills. Some got up, some didn't. Unfortunately, this piece of legislation did get up. In fact, it's interesting to note that this law is so bad that even Rob Hulls, the man who conceived it, voted against it when it went through the Legislative Assembly.
He voted against it.
Yeah. So that indicates just how bad this law is. But it came to the Legislative Council, the house that I'm in, on a Tuesday, and there was initial debate. Obviously, on the Tuesday, I got to speak on the Wednesday, and I think it was I started speaking about 5 o'clock on the Wednesday. I spoke throughout the Wednesday evening, started again on the Thursday morning, and spoke through Thursday morning and into Thursday afternoon, and finished up at about 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, or 3:30, or somewhere around there. And then my then colleague Peter Kavanagh got up and he spoke against it for some hours as well. It was passed through the Legislative Council at about I think from memory about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we were all dragged back the next morning for a very rare Friday sitting. In fact, I think it's the only Friday sitting I can remember of the Legislative Council, and it was to pass this specific bill. And we went through the committee stage, which means that the law was discussed clause by clause, and a number of amendments were put up. I think in excess of 30 from memory were put up. Things such as allowing greater counselling for women, giving babies pain relief before they're killed, limiting the age limit for babies to be killed. There were a whole range of amendments of that nature, and each and every one of them were defeated. And the one that I will never forget was the amendment which would have outlawed partial birth abortion. And of course, partial birth abortion is just one of the most barbaric, evil ways that man has ever devised to kill another human being. And that was knocked back as well by the Parliament of Victoria. They voted for partial birth abortion. And that probably caused me more distress than, in fact, I broke down as I was talking about it in the House. And this went on all day. We debated it all day, clause by clause. And each time we voted, the pro-abortion MPs voted as a block. Most of the Labor Party, the Greens, and a handful of Liberals, and one National, voted as a block and defeated each of the amendments. So we ended up at 11:30 on the Friday night with a bill which was unchanged from the one that had previously been introduced, and there it was, a bill allowing abortion, allowing babies to be killed right up until the moment they would otherwise be born. And I have to say, if I'm in the Parliament for the next 50 years, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if I was to stay there that long, I could not possibly think of a more distressing moment to live through.
That's incredible. Really appreciate you sharing that with us today, and it's very sad. And you'd almost have to say you wouldn't be human if you didn't have feelings about what happened on that day. And just like I was surprised, I think many viewers would be extremely surprised that the Law Reform Act exists, didn't know anything about it, and secondly, that exactly what happened as you've explained.
Well, John, I certainly will never, ever forget the 10th of October 2008, because it is the most appalling day, in my view, in the history of the state. A tragedy occurred that day, and it's one that we should never be allowed to forget, and one that we should overturn as soon as we can. But even when it's overturned, we should be never allowed to forget what the Parliament of Victoria passed. You know, the Parliament of Victoria passed a law.
145 members, and what was the votes it was voted? Do you recall the votes?
We were carried. It was carried by 3 votes.
Three votes carried. So 80 odd.
Well, six votes. 23 to 17. But if 3 had changed their mind, it would have been defeated. But the Parliament of Victoria voted to allow these babies to be killed by any means, for any reason, at any time during pregnancy. And that's something that we should be eternally ashamed of.
Absolutely, very sad. Yeah, it's very sad. But out of these things, there is hope.
Always.
There is hope. There is light at the end of a very long tunnel. And I know that there are things happening overseas, as in Texas. There's been a change of law, which has been a game changer. If you like. So do you know much about that?
Well, over in Texas it was fascinating, because the pro-abortionists came from all over the United States to try and stop this law from being passed. And they initially succeeded. But Governor Perry, to his credit, the governor of Texas, said, no, you don't. Back you go until you pass this law. And the pro-abortionists came in, and they were hooting and hollering, as they say in Texas, and catcalling and threatening, and there was violence and the sort of thing that we saw on the streets of Melbourne not so long ago, except on a much larger scale, and death threats and all sorts of things. But in the end, the bill was passed, the law was passed, and as a result of that law, tightening on the law. Over half the abortion clinics, I'm informed today, over half the abortion clinics since that law was passed in Texas have now closed. And the great news is it's not just Texas, North Dakota, Mississippi, a whole range of states across the US are passing similar legislation.
That's great news. Just to think that it all started from 1973 High Court decision, and now. But on that note, we'll be back shortly after a break. You're watching Support Life. I'm John Hendriks. We'll be back straight after a break. Welcome back to Support Life. My guest today is Bernie Finn, Member of Parliament. Hello, Bernie.
John.
What we were discussing just before the break was the atrocious 2008 Law Reform Act and the consequences of that in Parliament and what happened. Just like you and I, if people feel moved about this, what can they do about it?
You know, John, the greatest tragedy of this is, apart from the fact that there are thousands and thousands of babies being killed and their mothers are suffering as a result of that, obviously, the greatest tragedy is this could be solved tomorrow if everybody did what they should do. There are thousands and thousands of people, whether they be priests or politicians or public servants or bus drivers or whatever they may be. There are thousands and thousands of people in the community who say they are pro-life. They say they're pro-life, but they're not. It's not enough just to say, I'm against abortion, that means I'm pro-life. You've actually got to do something about it. And if we all do what we should do, bring pressure to bear on our politicians, we will change this law. There's nothing surer than that. And that is something that we are all, I believe, called to do. We all have an obligation to do. We all have a duty to do. And if we don't do it, if we stand by and we watch what's going on, we know what's going on and we allow it to happen, we're as bad as the abortionists.
What do they say? Silence is deafening, isn't it?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, in so many instances, that is the case. And I just say to those people who say they're pro-life, hey, prove it to me. Better still, don't prove it to me. Prove it to those mums and those babies who need us.
So they need us. Contact the Member of Parliament.
Absolutely.
Write to them.
Yep, right.
Be involved in pro-life activities. Go and see them.
Absolutely. Come to the march every year, obviously. Yes. The next year will be the 11th of October, and we're already looking forward to that. We will not be shied away by some mob of people who, well, I won't say what they are, but people who are getting a bit carried away. But, we need people to actually get involved. We need people to act as if babies are being killed. And the reason we need people to act as if babies are being killed is because babies are being killed. And that's the fact. That is the reality. What is the worst thing that has happened in Melbourne today? Was it praying on the freeway? Or was it the Mikey ticket didn't work? Or was it that they started killing babies at 7 o'clock this morning in East Melbourne? Or in Carlton, or in Richmond, or in South Yarra, or in Croydon? Is that the worst thing that's happened in Melbourne today?
Have to suggest it would?
I think so. I can't think of anything worse than places that are built, and this is the reality here in Melbourne, places that are built for one specific purpose, and that purpose is to kill babies. You take the baby in, the baby is killed, and then you go home. What sort of a civilization are we living in? Can we call ourselves civilised people if we allow that to happen? We know that's happening here in Melbourne, and we just drive past. We're on the tram, we just continue on our journey. If 1 day old babies were being taken into these places and chopped up, would we just say, oh well, that's people's choice?
We wouldn't. It would be murder, wouldn't it?
Of course it would be. So what's the difference? What's the difference? And you hear that argument from people like Peter Singer, who say, well, there is no moral difference, or indeed physical difference, between an unborn baby and a baby who is born.
It's only time.
It's only time. That's exactly right. So we have an obligation to do something about that. And if we turn our backs on these little people, then we are as responsible for their deaths as the people who actually kill them.
It's interesting wrap up. I recently read an article that suggests that a civilization that turns its back on the most vulnerable is doomed for failure.
I have no doubt about that at all. No doubt about that.
Unfortunately, we're heading that way.
Well, I think we have headed that way. I think we're already there. I think the US, as we discussed earlier, has turned the corner a little bit, but we're still there. You know, in Australia, it's still getting worse. We need to bounce back, and I'm hopeful that we can do that. Very hopeful.
I'm a big fan of the March for the Babies, Bernie, and all the great work you've done and your team down there. I went for the first time this year, and I must say I quite enjoyed it, and seeing 3,000 or 4,000 everyday Victorians with their families and children there and walking, and we want to give them a message of hope and a message that do not be afraid, do not worry about the protesters and the violence, or there wasn't really any significant amount of violence, but there was certainly people being pushed and punched. But why is the opposition so, head strong on trying to stop us from doing this?
Well, you've got to remember who drives them. Who is ultimately responsible for the abortion industry and the act of abortion itself. I mean, what we're talking about here is a mother allowing her baby to be killed. Is that the most anti-human, most inhumane thing that one can think of? The greatest act of betrayal that you can possibly think of? Who is behind that sort of thing? Is it the father of all lies? Is it the father of all violence? I mean, I recall at night of that bill being passed, there was a presence in the Parliament that night, and it was an evil presence. And I will never forget that feeling that I had as that bill was passed. And I felt that presence again in the streets of Melbourne not so long ago in the March for the Babies, as we were confronted by people who were espousing evil on the streets. And I mean, let's face facts. If you are prepared to support killing babies, throwing a few eggs at old people, knocking women over, smacking a few people in the head, that's not going to worry you. That is minor in comparison.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It is.
It really is.
It is.
We watched some footage after the March for the Babies, and we were quite, astonished as to, how these people could. What do they call themselves? They can't call themselves pro-choice.
No.
I would think you'd have to suggest they're pro-death.
Well, that's what they are. That's why. And if you listen to what some of them were saying, they were talking about dead babies. They were talking about how much they rejoice in abortion. These people, I felt quite sorry for them, to tell you the truth. They're sick puppies.
They're hurt people.
Many of them are very, very hurt. And I saw a number of those people who've had abortions, obviously, clearly, you could tell. And I felt sorry for them, even though they were doing a fair bit of damage to us physically at the same time.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, Bernie. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us and enlightening us about things, and we'll keep up the good fight, and we ask all our viewers to do that.
Absolutely. Good on you, John.
Thank you once again. You've been watching Support Life. I'm John Hendriks. Please join us again next week.